all of the advanced work that each of our students has done in preparing for this and thinking about these topics in Mr. Finnegan's class and in my class, and preparing some questions. We are so excited to get this semester-long Civic Action Project started by hearing from some guest speakers and experts in these fields today, and we will give them all a good welcome. I also really want to thank and appreciate teachers that have brought their classes that aren't in civics. Really appreciate your interest and giving your students the opportunity to be here for this. So here's kind of how the day lays out. We'll have time for the panelists to introduce themselves and say a little bit about how they got into this work, why this work is so important to them and to the communities that we share, and also talk a little bit about what they do on a day-to-day basis. After they've done that, we'll have an opportunity to have students ask questions, and then panelists will kind of make some connections back to how these different issues intersect with each other, and we'll take it from there. Later on in class today, students are going to be discussing and reflecting on what we learned here today, and students are going to be putting together their first part of their project, which is a two-paragraph reflection on what we've learned and thought about. So we ask that students who have their KWL charts have those out, but don't worry about writing down every single thing a panelist says. We'd rather you be actively listening to what you're hearing and thinking about it as they speak. Just jot down a note here and there if there is something that really stands out to you that you want to make sure that you remember. And then just a final note for anybody that came in lately, make sure that there is no food or drink in the theater. That is a hard and fast rule here at Hillside to keep this space secure and be stewards of the space. So I'm going to ask that our teachers that are here in the room just kind of walk along, and if anybody does have any food out, send them out of the theater for a moment if they feel they need to eat it right now and take a tardy. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and get started. So our panelists are Ms. Erica Washington of the Center for Death Penalty Litigation, Mr. Brian Profit of the Durham Association of Educators, and a longtime Hillside teacher. Glad to have him back in the building today. Jennifer Eisen of North Carolina Warren, Antonia Williams with United for Respect, Roxana Mendezou with Migrant Roots Media, and Mr. Jesse McCoy with the Duke Eviction Diversion Work and the Duke Law Clinic, Civil Law Clinic, Civil Justice Clinic. Thank you, sir. So I'm going to just hand it over to Erica to get us started.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm excited to be here speaking with you all. As was said, I am a staff attorney with the Center for Death Penalty Litigation. So I represent men and women on death row here in North Carolina. We also have cases in Texas and Virginia. So that means that, everywhere from preparing for trial, where the state's trying to put them to death, up until trying to appeal until asking for clemency, and then all the way up, unfortunately, to potential execution. I am representing them throughout that process at different stages. I'm going to speak on mass incarceration today, and I know I only have 1 minute, so this is a really brief introduction, but if you could just raise your hands if you have written some concept of what mass incarceration is. Okay, all right, great. So I'm going to circle back and speak more to that, but as well as being a staff attorney doing death penalty work, I also just work on this issue of mass incarceration and also the reimagining. What do we do with the criminal justice system when we hopefully, in my opinion, tear it down and replace it? So I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to speak with you all more.
Hey Nicholas, are we just doing quick intros, or because you said why do we do this? Should we be saying that as well? Okay, got it.
So quickly.
Cool. Cool. Okay, thanks. So yeah, as Mr. Gregory said, my name is Brian Profit. I've taught high school for 11 years, 8 of them here at Hillside. I was here from 2007 to 2015 in the history department with He was my 2 doors down neighbor. And for the last 4 years, I was out of the classroom leading the Durham Association of Educators, which is our union here of educators, and I'll say a little bit more about what a union is and maybe even ask y'all to share what you know about unions before I talk a little bit later. And now I work for the district, working with an initiative that our union won in the district that's about kind of rethinking how schools are structured and how decision making and how people get engaged in what our day-to-day lives in the schools look like. So that's what I work on now full time. And I'm running for the leadership of the statewide union. So teaching and union work is what I do.
Hey y'all, good morning. My name is Jennifer Eisen, and I'm a youth climate justice organizer. And that is a very long title, and for a lot of people, they're not completely sure exactly what that means. I really have to explain to my family each year, like, oh, what is it that you do again? Every time I'm home. But youth organizing is really just about you as young people. It's about really having young people really start to become stakeholders in this whole process of how do I engage with my community. And specifically, I do that on environmental justice. And I know there are lots of topics up here that I am very interested in. And also seem a lot more exciting a lot of times than what environmental and climate justice can be. So a part of my mission, as long as I've been with NC Warren, is to not only share with young people what climate and environmental justice is, but it's to bring along more young Black and brown folks to the movement, because this movement is absolutely about us and impacts us on the first and worst scale. And so it's important to me to share that sort of information with you all and have you understand how do I engage with this process of organizing.
Alright, I'm Antonio. I'm here representing United for Respect. We're an organization that helps retail workers fight for higher wages and better working conditions. If you have seen the teachers earlier in the year, wearing red, marching downtown in Raleigh, or the fast food workers fighting for $15 an hour, we're the same thing, except for we're working more like stores like Walmart, Lowe's, other retail stores, just try to help them make a better living for themselves.
Good morning, y'all. How are you doing? Yes? Well, my name is Roxana Bendesu. I use pronouns she, her, hers. And I'm from Lima, Peru. I'm an immigrant. And I decided to start Migrant Roots Media because I got tired of people telling my story. I got tired of people telling me what I needed. I got tired of being used as a person to just say the side of my sad story of migration and not be able to do my own political analysis about my own condition. And so that's why I started Migrant Roots Media, to try to use technology to tell the stories of immigrants, starting with my own story, to the public, to change the narratives of feeling sorry for immigrants to see the other side of it, which is how courageous immigrants are to do whatever they need to do to survive in this world, to start walking to a different country, to sometimes they have to leave their family members in their countries. And so I think that part is not highlighted so much. So I decided to start something new. And I would love to share the means of doing this, because it could apply to so many different topics, to tell your own stories.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jesse McCoy. I am the supervising attorney of the Duke Civil Justice Clinic. The work we do is primarily focused on housing. So, like you, I am a native of Durham, North Carolina, and unfortunately, Durham has the distinction of leading the state amongst the major metropolitan areas in the rate of eviction. We're averaging just about 900 eviction filings per month in Durham County. And as you might imagine, when I go to the courtrooms and I see the people who are being evicted, most often they're going to be Black and Latino single mothers. And so, knowing that there's this need, what I wanted to do was design a program that was going to help the people in the community using some of the resources that we have available at Duke University. And And in so doing, we've partnered up with Durham County's Department of Social Services, as well as Legal Aid of North Carolina, and launched what's known as the Eviction Diversion Program. So in Durham County, anybody who is in jeopardy of being evicted, when they're served with eviction paperwork, will automatically be served with information about our program as well. We've been in operation for a little over 2 years now, and in those 2 years of operation, we have been successful in 79% of the cases in avoiding eviction judgments. So we have a good track record. We've got some good buy-in from the city and the county. Our ultimate goal is to change the way that eviction works in Durham County altogether, and hopefully to eliminate eviction altogether as well. As far as sharing our work, goals, and mission, our mission is simple. Our mission is just to stop the eviction crisis that's going on in Durham County. The way that we do that is through partnerships and through educational information. So in partnership, by partnering with Durham County Department of Social Services, we know that they have access to various pots of money that they are given expressly for rental assistance funding. And so for people who may be slightly behind and just need a brief cash injection to get back on top, it's a good place to go. But we also know that there are members of the community that aren't always necessarily happy about going to DSS. So part of our other job is to talk to other various nonprofit organizations in the area of which Durham is very rich in, and find other solutions for people that may circumnavigate that process. Also, what a lot of people don't know is when you're being evicted, there's a tendency for people to look at, hey, you didn't pay rent, why don't you just pay rent? And that's kind of a loaded issue, because most often what you're going to hear in court are people who say, I lost my job, or I had an unexpected medical illness, or my sole source of transportation broke down, and I have to pay for the car that's in the shop. So for those reasons, you may not know this, but those are not legal justifications to defend against an eviction. A lot of times, the things that are legal defenses, people don't even know. So for instance, what if you've been living in a place paying your rent faithfully until now, but the place is infested with roaches, bed bugs, snakes, rats, right? Those are legal defenses, and a lot of people don't know that. So part of our job is creating awareness and education for tenants in Durham County so that they understand what's going on, what can be a legal defense, and then secondly, to equalize the playing field, because about 90% of the landlords who go to court are represented by counsel. And on top of that, the landlord has picked a court date that is convenient for them, and the people who don't show up to court automatically get evicted. So nobody stops to ask a tenant, hey, can you take off work on such and such a day so you can be in court? Nobody stops to ask a tenant, do you have child care handled so that you can be in court? And so the problem is that we have to make sure that when people come to court, not only can they effectively get there, but they can effectively advocate for themselves. And with the resources of Duke University, we're oftentimes able to create that equalization.
How many people here know someone that has faced eviction at some point?
Thank you. How many people know an immigrant? Yes. So the issue of migration affects many of us. Is that right? And multiply that by the families that accompany those people. They're not only hundreds, they're millions in the US. And then if you think about the world, so many more. There's so many people on migrating right now for different reasons. When you think about the issue of migration, what do you think about? Hmm? Yes, please. Yes. People sacrificing their safetyness, right? Because they're gonna go on a journey that is long, that is hard, and they know that they can die. Who would do that? What are the reasons why a person would be willing to do that? Anybody have any idea? Do you hear that conversation happening out there? Why are people leaving? A lot of the times we hear the stories when people are already here. When people don't have documents, when people don't have access to a driver's license, when people don't have access to go to college. That's what we hear, and that's great that we're also working on that. But everybody needs to work on different pieces, right? Because the issue is so large. So I think many of us have to focus on thinking about the reasons why people left. Because if we don't think about that piece, this is going to continue happening. Do we want to work on stopping deportations for the rest of our lives? Do we want to work on trying to get a license for people only? I mean, of course we do want to make sure that people who are already here have a life with dignity. That's the obvious thing. But I feel like what we tend not to think about is to make sure that people don't make this type of decision. That is pretty horrible, right? Would you be able to pack a backpack with just the bare necessities and start walking? Can you imagine that decision? Can you imagine making that decision? Yeah. And so nobody really is dreaming about doing this. Nobody has this American dream, as they call it. People are escaping something. So in order for us to address what is going on here, we also have to talk about why. And so how do we do that these days? Using the tools that we have, right? Social media, maybe learning the skills on how to create a podcast, a video, and we'll talk more about that, because those are opportunities that you can have as well. And that way, we don't only talk about the stories, the sad part of the stories, but also the courage that it takes to make those type of decisions to be able to survive. And more than that, we talk about the reasons why people are leaving. Because the reasons that people are leaving, a lot of times have to do with US foreign policy. Did you know that? Some of you are nodding. Yes, you knew that. Did you know that the US has a place called the School of the Americas, although they changed the name to sanitize it, but where they train military personnel from Latin America to basically repress their own people. A lot of the graduates from that program have been found to participate in dismantling democracies around Latin America. And this has been decades. That's why people have had to migrate for so long. How is that fair? How is that fair? How is it fair that when you come to the country that is hurting you, people are rejecting you? How does that make any sense when the least that they can do is to welcome you and apologize? So it's not a matter of just feeling sorry for people. Actually, it's not at all that. It's a matter of justice. It's a matter of bringing the truth to this issue. And that requires changing the narrative. Changing what people are saying, changing the conversations. And that takes work. Because we have to learn our own history. Many of you may have some ancestors from other countries in other parts of the world. Do we know our own history? Perhaps we don't. So we're working on that. We're learning our own history, starting from our own stories. Thank you.
show of hands, how many of you work in retail or know someone who does? Somebody. Okay, so far there are about 16 million retail workers in the country. And the thing about retail is more of a power thing. Usually the ones with the money, the big company owners who own all the retail companies or industries, they're usually the ones in power. They control the way that we work, the way that your time is scheduled, the conditions that you work in. It took just a while for even women to receive maternity leave in a lot of major companies. I was a Walmart worker a few years back. It was nice to begin with. It kind of sucked after a while. I started off getting a good amount of hours every week. I was working on my own time. I had time to schedule, plan trips, plan time with my family. And then, I'm trying to think of this. We went through the whole thing of hours getting cut. Point system was added. You could be sick. You could be a car could break down. The points add up. And you like, I'm a church musician. I play every Sunday morning. My schedule got changed to me working on Sundays, and I was told by my manager that somebody like me couldn't possibly be interested in religion anyway. So that was it. That was one of the main reasons I joined United for Respect. It's about being out there to tell the story for someone who can't. Being there to put up the fight in the front line for someone who's either unable to do so or afraid to do so because they're scared to lose their job. You want to be the voice for somebody, and especially with me being the person that likes to do things the right way, I want other people to succeed. I want other people to be able to live, not just pay their bills. I want for other people to be able to I want other people to not feel like they have to go to work to afford to go to work. Okay. Is it good? Okay. My main thing for joining was, I don't want people to feel like they have to go to work to afford to go to work. People should be able to live. People should be able to spend time with their families, take care of their child or their spouse or whatever family member that's sick. United for Respect has members literally everywhere, from California over to this side of the country. We gather together, we do certain actions to raise awareness about what's going on. We won the battle at home office that's in Bentonville, Arkansas, for to raise wages there in 2018. We also just went down again to the home office this year, and we met with Bernie Sanders, and he made our issues more noticeable to the country. We have secret groups everywhere online, so we can discuss issues. If someone's afraid to ask the manager or whatever about what's going on, or what's allowed, or to even look up at work what's going on, is this allowed? Am I able to do this?
you are familiar or have heard of the phrase climate justice? Not climate change, but climate justice. Okay, so just a few hands. And then how many of you all have heard of the phrase climate change? Right, okay. How many of y'all could actually tell me what climate change really means though? Right, okay. So climate change is one of those topics that I will be very honest that I have not taken an interest in my entire life. When I graduated from college, I studied African American Studies. And so, if I'm being completely honest, I thought I had a pretty good depth of knowledge about African Americans, their plight in this country, and lots of like major movements in our history. And I really thought I had a good depth of knowledge on that, and I knew all about that. And then I moved to North Carolina in 2014, to Eastern North Carolina, and I taught high school there, and I taught middle school for a while. And I enjoyed my experiences in the classroom, but I was looking for an opportunity to still be engaged with students, but to do that differently than the way teachers do. And so I found this organization, the one that I work for now, and I was like, okay, so this is interesting. They work on climate and environment, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how do I fit into that puzzle. And within a month of me working there, my supervisor had me do lots of research about the history of the climate justice movement. Where did it come from? And I was completely shocked to learn that the climate justice movement started here in North Carolina, specifically out in Eastern North Carolina in Warren County. So very similar to what we see in lots of other movements and things that we see continuous to this day is there's a company in Raleigh that had this, they were burning this energy, and once you burn it, it releases this ash. And so they decided, so we have all this ash with all these like damaging chemicals. We don't want to keep it here in Raleigh, so we're going to take it, we're just going to dump it in Eastern North Carolina. You know, it's a small community, small black, rural community, not a lot of people are there, they don't have a lot of power, we'll just dump that there and we'll keep it moving. And that really kind of started the beginning of the climate justice movement right here in North Carolina. And what I also learned very quickly was that climate and environmental justice impacts young black and brown people across the world. And poor people, people from low-income communities, people who, and oftentimes women as well. So when I think about it, to really kind of drive it home, what I want you all to think about is Hurricane Dorian, right? And so Hurricane Dorian just recently happened. And thankfully, here in the United States, a lot of us weren't harmed. And, you know, a few folks had like a couple days off of work, off of school, and we had to watch the devastation that hit the Bahamas. And now what we're seeing is the folks from the Bahamas who have lost everything are now trying to come to the United States to get help. And what we're seeing is that they're being turned away at the border. These very people who every year, people from the United States flock to the Bahamas to vacation. And now these people are what we call climate refugees. So when Roxana talks about people who migrate and why they migrate, climate change is one of those reasons. So you have a storm like Hurricane Dorian that is made worse by climate change. Lots of people thought it was funny that it didn't arrive here yet, but that was because the atmosphere is warmer. And once the atmosphere starts to warm up, it stalls these storms so that they aren't able to travel as quickly as they are. So a stalled storm, you know, in one place means, okay, the storm holds out for us, but it means that place is hit so much harder than originally it would be. So what we're seeing now is that we have climate refugees, and these just, you know, from Hurricane Dorian, but that's not all of it. Some of the things that we're seeing with the conversations that we have about immigration are because some of those residents are climate refugees. And if we don't do what we need to take this country away from using fossil fuels and to really caring about our climate and our environment, we're going to see that in a greater and greater scale. And we already see what can happen if your government doesn't want to help you out. So just some things to think about.
Most y'all are juniors, seniors? Which, both? Yes, both? Okay, cool. So, I've been living in Durham about as long as most of you all have been alive. And in the time that I've lived in Durham, Durham has changed quite a bit. And I think actually that if you all think about your own lives living in Durham, you could also probably notice this. And I'm just gonna ask for one key indicator about how Durham has changed, at least in my life in the last 5-10 years. If you go to any major intersection in Durham right now, what are you going to see? I heard it from the back. The question was, if you go to any major intersection in Durham right now, what are you going to see? And I heard someone in the back saying homeless people. Right? Y'all have noticed that, yeah? So when I moved to Durham 15 years ago, that isn't what was happening in every intersection. And so when I was y'all's age, homelessness, and for some reason, and I'm sure for everybody up here, there's different triggers, right? Like Antonio's experience at work. What are the things, Roxana talking about the stories they get told about her life, what are the things that kind of matter to you? So for me, when I was y'all's age, it was homelessness. It was really just bizarre to me that people lived their lives sitting outside and asking people to help them get food. And I was just like, I've got $5 in my pocket, why wouldn't I just give it to this person? So it just didn't make sense to me, the idea that people lived outside, that people didn't have homes. And so I decided about when I was y'all's age that I wanted to do something with my life that was about helping people, right? My life had been pretty cool, and it just really troubled me when I saw folks suffering that didn't feel like they needed to. And so when I went to college, I did a lot of work working with organizations that would get food at the end of the day, and then bring it down and hang out with homeless guys at night, and really, bring the food, but really build relationships and get to know people. And so that was really shifting a lot of how I thought. And then I went to this conference. Again, I was a little bit older than y'all at this point, about 21. I went to this conference, and there was a guy on stage talking about homelessness and experiences in a conversation that he had with a woman who was talking about how every Thanksgiving and Christmas, she served food at a homeless shelter. And she was having children herself, and she was talking about how excited she was to be bringing her children down to the homeless shelter, and that she hoped that when her daughter was older, that that's what she would do with her children for holidays. So I'm pausing there because there's something real weird about that statement, which is I don't know, I hope when y'all have kids that there aren't people who are homeless that we have to go feed. And so the guy on stage was like, why would we put all of our time and energy into figuring out how to feed people once they're homeless, how to give people water when they're outside, how to give people coats when it's super cold, rather than just dealing with the question that Roxanne was talking about. It's why? Right? Why is this happening in the first place? And so when you look around and see the folks standing on corners, you should also probably ask, I don't know, in my neighborhood when I walk through, are there houses that are empty? Right, so the problem with homelessness isn't that there aren't houses, right? It's just that we aren't able to match those things up, and it requires resources, right? This is the work that you're doing today. So for me, there was just something wow, this system is really wrong. We got homes everywhere, but we got people living outside. This doesn't make any sense. And so the other thing that happened right around the time when I was y'all's age was what we just celebrated the anniversary of the other day, which was September 11th. And so I grew up in a military family, and so for me, there was not really much of a question about how we use our military around the world. And I watched this terrible tragedy go down, and I had people who were in New York, and I had people who were, scared about this and, really, really impacted. But then immediately, the only thing that the government was talking about was how do we go to war someplace else and kill other people? And I was like, this is what we do. When our people get killed, we just go kill a whole bunch of other people someplace else. And so I got involved in the anti-war movement. And after the U.S. invaded Afghanistan 18 years ago, right, we've been in war y'all's whole life, there was a conversation about going to war in Iraq. And Iraq had nothing to do with September 11th, right? This is an old grudge, this is about oil, all this other stuff. And so we put 15 million people in the streets. 15 million people in the streets before that war started to say, no, we don't want this war, we don't want you to go kill people. And then what did the United States do? We went to war and we killed people, right? And so it was so frustrating to see we could take all this action and nothing would change. And so for me, I realized that I needed to have power. I needed to be working with folks who, when we put 15 million people in the streets and we wanted to stop something, we stopped something. And so when I became a teacher, it became really important for me to think about building a union. Because it felt like a union was a place that we could have power. Raise your hand if you know what a union is. All right, about half of y'all. So when Graber Grace is a jerk to you in class, what do? I heard some people saying, well, we shut up and we take it. I heard some people saying, I talk junk about him in the hallways. Right, but if you went to Dr. Logan and you said, Graber Grace is treating us like a jerk every day. You just went there by yourself. You said, this guy's a jerk. He's not helping us learn. Right? And Logan says, so what? Go back to class. How would that feel? Would you feel good walking in his class every day? What if everybody in the class that felt like he was a jerk went to Dr. Logan together and said, we're not going back to class until you tell him to stop being a jerk to us? You think Logan would do something? That's what the union is, right? If we just do stuff by ourselves, we get beat. But if we roll together and don't separate ourselves, then we're stronger. And so for me, becoming a teacher was about how do I get other teachers, how do I get students, and how do I get parents on the same page to fight for the schools and the communities that we deserve, that all of us deserve. And so what we've been doing is trying to figure out how to get all of us on the same page and build a union of educators that is working closely with our students and parents. Because if you look around the state of North Carolina, if you had students, teachers, and parents all on the same page, y'all know who the governor is? Roy Cooper. Roy Cooper won this state by 10,000 votes. That's like almost nobody. And if you had teachers, parents, and students all on the same team, you could change who gets elected every single year. So that's what I do. I work to build a union. And over the last several years, Antonio mentioned, seeing the streets and the teachers wearing, teachers in the streets wearing red, right? And on Wednesdays we wear red. Y'all see this going on in the building? Right, so that's the work that we've been doing. A few years ago, they kidnapped one of our students in one of these immigration raids, in his front yard while he was getting ready to go to school. And our union just said no. And we organized, and we had people talking to Hillary Clinton when she was running for the presidency. And we stopped this kid's deportation. We brought him back to graduate with his classmates. And so that for me is about the work that we do in building a union is how do we get all of us on the same page to fight, because when we fight together we have way more power. And if we can get a teachers union and fight for the schools that we deserve, we can also fight to have climate change in, because guess what? If we don't change that, we don't have schools. So what I'm trying to do with this union stuff is how do we build power and fight around all this stuff, but do it together on the same page. So that's what I got.
I'm trying to decide where to start, but let's see. So a number of you indicated that you have heard of this thing we call mass incarceration. Why don't we see who knows somebody who is incarcerated, so locked up, or let's even expand that to on probation or parole. Okay, so it looks like about half. So that's what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about what it means that this country locks up 2.2 million people, right? That is about the population of Houston. That's not far from the population of Chicago. So though we have walls that separate us, think about that number, that mass of us all behind bars. And I assume the ones who have heard of mass incarceration have some understanding that we are an outlier in this country, right? So we have about 4 to 5% of the entire world's population, so the entire globe. We have about 4 to 5% in this country, but in terms of the prison, the entire globe's incarcerated population, prison population, we have 25% of the world's prison population, but only 4% of the world's population. So we are locking up millions of people, and that makes us an outlier. That's more than China. That's more than countries with significantly higher populations. So, just to echo what some of the individuals on this panel have said, and it's been so interesting learning about the work that they're doing, like so much of this is about power, right? And who has power, and especially who has power. I personally think these two things just aren't directly lined up, but who has power to shape the narrative. And so where we see mass incarceration, because this wasn't always the case, this has been since about the late 1970s, 1980s, when we went from, at least for drug crimes, for example, we went from about 40,000 people locked up on drug crimes to about 435,000 people. So between 1980 and 2017, we went from 40,000 to 400 and I believe 35,000 people locked up on drug crimes. So what's the narrative that we're telling in order to start doing that? Right? What are we telling a narrative of addiction, of illness, of need for rehabilitation, or are we telling a narrative of super predators and people who need to be locked away, who are public safety concerns, right? Like, what was the story that we're telling to get to where we are, and who has the power to shape the story? Because when you can shape the story, because we're all operating under kind of shared narratives that we have accepted as a population, at least how I see it, right? So what is the story we are accepting to lead to where we are today, which is a place where we are throwing people away? And I think one of the strands of that story is the disposability of Black and brown people. And that has been since the foundation, right? I mean, and it is evolved, and it looks a little different, but the underlying root is disposability, because you can't, unless you believe in disposability of certain populations, you can't get to what we see in this country, which allowed so many of you in this room to raise your hands and say you know somebody who's incarcerated. And that's the population that I work with every day. I'm in the Durham jail almost every day. I'm at Central Prison, which is in Raleigh. That's where our death row is. And I do death penalty work. So I went to the University of Virginia for undergrad, and I had the immense opportunity to be taught for a series of lectures by Angela Davis, who's a Black Panther Party. She was part of the Black Panther Party leader, and she talked about mass incarceration, and this was in 2008. She and a number of others were speaking about it, but it wasn't as much a part of the dominant narrative as it is today. So she started talking about this thing of mass incarceration, and that's what started me on this journey that I've been on since college, to try to figure out what is this? What are the stories we're telling to have gotten us to where we are, and how do we get to where we need to be, and how do we stop disposing of certain communities? So we see now opiate addiction, right? Like, what's the story that we're starting to tell about that, and why? Why are we telling that story about that, which we need to be, right? But why does it look so different from when we saw crack cocaine become really prominent in certain communities? So let's see where I want to go with this. So part of where we got, because I know you guys are kind of doing this civil project, and you're trying to I don't know if you've already been assigned or chosen what areas you're going to focus on, but just to give a little bit more background on mass incarceration. So we saw a number of things happen in the 1980s that got us to where we are today. We saw sentencing policy changes, so you have 3 strike laws, right? Mandatory minimum. So we started locking people away for much longer amounts of time than we had previously. We saw a real focus on incriminating drug addiction and putting people in prison for that. And what we know, at least what I have come to accept and what many people say and what the scholarship supports, is, for example, the individual causes of violence, right, are pretty much determined to be shame, isolation, exposure to violence, and inability to meet your economic needs, yours and your loved ones. So shame, isolation, exposure to violence, and inability to meet economic needs, every one of those is baked into our prison system, right? So our chief strategy for addressing wrongdoing, in this case violence, and I can talk about addiction and all the other ways that incarceration does not help that. But for violence, which we have to deal with violent crimes if we're going to deal with mass incarceration. A lot of the people who are behind bars are there for violent crimes. But our chief strategy for dealing with violence has every one of those causes of violence baked into it. So isolation, shame, exposure to violence, inability to meet your economic needs. So we have a problem where our strategy for addressing an issue actually furthers it, continues it, deepens it. So we have to do something. And that right there is the kind of area that I am most drawn to. I am in court all the time. I have a lot of clients. So I am right now just trying to keep them out of the worst of it, trying to push back the train as it like kind of is coming towards them. But really, and what I hope as you all engage with this work and potentially engage with the issue of mass incarceration, what do we put in its place? Because what we're doing, it just doesn't work. It makes it worse. And yes, there are people who at times need to be separated from society, but what we're doing is not working. So what do we build, what do we put in its place when we hopefully kind of tear it down, which is personally where my efforts are going towards. So what do we build? What is our strategy? How do we deal with wrongdoing? How do we deal with conflict? How do we create community so we're not so comfortable throwing people away? And what is the narrative we start to tell about wrongdoing so that we shift power?
Thank you so much to each of you. Mr. Finnegan, is the mic ready for student questions?
Let's see. Yep.
Great. So we're going to pivot down to an opportunity for students to ask questions. And I know some of you have prepared questions, and some of you probably came up with questions during the course of what you were listening to. So let's go ahead and just give our panelists one more round of applause. When you ask a question, please say what topic you are asking about, or if there's a particular panelist you're directing it to, and we'll hand the mic to that person.
You can also ask questions to anyone who's willing to answer. Just raise your hand and I'll get you the mic, and a little mic use 101. Just point it right at your mouth so we can all hear you. All right. All right, cool. And say your name too for everyone.
My name is Layton Adams. I was asking, is there a way to combat gentrification and redlining when it comes to minority communities?
Thank you for the question. So I think that there are a couple different ways to combat gentrification. One of the biggest issues and one of the biggest things that helps gentrification develop is the fact that our communities have historically been neglected and denied access to capital. So everything from redlining, predatory loans, they were intentionally designed and structured to eliminate the ability of Black communities to be able to access a house. And for most people, home ownership is their main vehicle towards building wealth. Half of that battle was done in trying to pass the Fair Housing Act of 1968. But the other side of that is these violations continue to occur. And the problem is that oftentimes when you're looking at mortgages or any kind of security instrument, the financing behind it can be so egregious that if you don't know what other people in the community are getting as far as interest rates or approval amounts, then you won't know when you're getting screwed over, right? So the first step is making people aware of what is an appropriate interest rate for the size of the note. What can you do to get yourself from a position of renting to be in a position of ownership? One of the things that I want, if nothing else, that I want you all to understand is we have intentionally created this perpetual class of people who will always have to rent based on these ambitions to be able to access that capital. And so, because we've created that perpetual class, the landlords oftentimes get the power, and I'm not just talking about the power to be able to collect your rent or or have you live in a certain standard that you may not be happy with living in, but I also mean the political power. Who writes the statutes? It's not tenants, right? Tenants aren't on the general assembly. So all these things go hand in hand. I think the first step is educating yourself about what's going on and why this is happening. The second step is making sure that if you have the ability and opportunity to move from a position of renting to a position of ownership, that is also a move from a position of powerlessness to a position of power. And so what I want everybody to do is to be empowered first, to take care of yourself, and also to express what's going on to members of your community so that they can do the same thing.
Other questions? Great question, Mike. Great answer. Can we pass that?
My name is Kevin Allen, and I have a question about affordable housing. Do you feel that the low minimum wage is a big factor why people are getting evicted and can't pay their rent? And do you feel that if the minimum wage was increased by $2 to $3, will it help solve the problem, or will it create more problems?
All right, another good question. So as far as minimum wage, yes, I think minimum wage needs to be increased. I think that we have shown time after time that just the method of living, the manner of living, cannot sustain itself based on what people are getting paid now. There was a talk given in Durham County where they said the average fast food worker in Durham County is averaging $18,500 per year. And there are a lot of people in Durham County who are working on fast food wages, right? You can't really afford to stay. The average 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment in Durham County right now is about $920 a month. And that's increasing because we have a very hot market for landlords and a lower supply of rental housing. So whenever you have low supply, high demand, the price is going to go up. And that's part of the reason, going back to the other question, why you see gentrification, because the people who are able to afford it usually aren't going to look like the folks who are representative of the community. So the first step, the first question, yes, increase minimum wage. As far as affordable housing is a political term that a lot of people use, and it can mean a lot of different things. Typically, when they look to whether or not housing is affordable, people are assessing it based on the HUD standard of adjusted gross income. But the adjusted gross income nationally doesn't always reflect the adjusted gross income of the local community. So what I believe needs to happen is we need to be more localized in how we approach what is affordable, right? And then on top of that, we have to have developers who are going to be committed in engaging in building a greater supply of housing that is affordable to the local community. Right now, what we've had in Durham County is we've had some developers who have said, oh yeah, if you give me tax incentives, I'll dedicate a certain percentage of my units to be quote unquote affordable. Yet when those units become available, they are often filled by college students and not members of the community, because technically the college student fits that affordability matrix. So I think across the board there are a couple things that need to be implemented, but the main thing that you have to have is money for people to be able to sustain the housing that they get.
Another good question. Others, got a few. I'm going to go over here since we have this class here. Get you two.
And we have a second mic now, so I'm going to give this one over to you, Riley, and I'm going to start. We'll work on this side so we can save time for passing.
Okay, my name is Portland, and I have a question for environmental justice. So, is there something we can make our larger companies or corporations do to better enforce a better way to help the environment, like change the packaging that they use, or encourage their customers to use reusable bags and stuff for the shopping, etc.? And is there a way to do it without immediately affecting the public? Because I know before they did things by adding taxes about every plastic bag, and it was quickly shut down because the public didn't have it, basically. So is there a way it can be done with just affecting the company, but not the general public?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And one of the things I have to talk about a lot in my work is this idea of individual contribution versus like a larger scale contribution. So there are absolutely individual ways that we can all do our own part to help slow climate change and to really kind of help fight against those greater systems that are working to kind of perpetuate that. And so some of those things that you said are absolutely great options, right? Being able to have reusable bags is super, if you can do that, is a really cool way to do that. For those of you that, if you can, shop local, that's so important, supporting local businesses around you. Not only just to help the community itself, but where folks get those materials from, how far they have to travel. Those things also can help kind of minimize the effects that we have of climate change. Some people will also tell you to reduce the amount of meat that you eat. I won't tell you that because I still do consume meat myself. One of the challenges I found when I first got into environmental justice, and especially when I think about Black and brown communities, is that there are times where it feels like a lot of the suggestions that people give can be a bit judgmental. Because it is very easy for someone who lives in Chapel Hill to say, oh, of course I drive a Prius, and I only shop local, and I only eat vegan, when you have the accessibility to those things. When I lived in Eastern North Carolina, there was a Walmart and a Food Lion and fast food restaurants. And so my options for, if I wanted to eat vegan, were very slim, even if I wanted to, were, like I said, they were very few. So while I do feel like it's super important for us all to do those individual causes, for me and more of my work is more about how do we challenge these corporations that are really the leaders of climate catastrophe. So one of those things and one of the big things that my organization does is we serve as a watchdog for Duke Energy. And that's a big challenge to say in the state of North Carolina because they have a monopoly over our state's energy. If you live in the state of North Carolina, even if you have solar panels on your house, that it still comes from Duke Energy. They have a monopoly over our state and in our legislature, and so one of the things that we're trying to do right now is to fight to break up that monopoly. Because Duke Energy, since they are a monopoly, they decide where you get your energy from, how you get it, and how they give it to you, and what cost you pay. And we see over and over again, those rates are higher in low-income neighborhoods because of lots of different factors, including some of the houses that they live in might not be insulated as well. So you're paying a much higher electric bill. So it's a twofold answer. It's a lot about, yes, there are individual things that you can do, and we encourage those things because they're very important, but it's also about learning about collective action and how you can fight against these larger corporations that are really perpetrating climate change.
What about the innocent people on mass incarceration?
Can you repeat that?
What about the innocent people?
Sorry.
Ms. Harry.
What about the innocent people? I mean, yeah, what about the innocent people? We know that there are a ton of innocent people who are locked up, and we know the reasons why they are locked up. I mean, so we have to do something about it. A lot of the work that I do with the Center for Death Penalty Litigation is to look at those causes. Because here in North Carolina, we have exonerated a significant number of death row inmates have been found to be not guilty. Significantly higher than most states in this country. So we are locking innocent people up. And we're locking innocent people up because, for example, we have some junk science. So we'll go in there and we'll say, oh, the teeth marks look similar to the teeth of this individual. I mean, we really have relied on crazy science in order to sustain a conviction. But also the story that we're telling about who is committing crime means that certain people are more likely to be stopped. Then they're more likely to be arrested. Then they're more likely to be convicted. So at every stage, it piles on top of itself. and leads to results that are not reliable. And so ultimately, the work I do, I work with people who have admitted to the wrongdoing. I work with people who are claiming innocence, who are innocent, but we're putting them all in the same situation, right? And then we don't have the resources to really allow the people who are innocent to go to trial. So instead, what you see is 97% of cases, people plead because it's such a high risk, because of things like junk science, because of blue codes of silence, which is the term used for police who are not going to implicate other police officers for doing something that they should not have done. So we have all of these interacting factors that lead to a situation where a ton of people who are innocent are just going to plead because the risk of going to trial is so significant, right? Because you can plead to a few years, which means you lose your job, you're away from your family, you can't support your family, you're isolated, you're now in a system that actually increases and furthers these factors that lead you to more crime, right? Whether you committed the original crime or not, you're now in a system that makes it more difficult for you to live a life that avoids interaction with the system. But you're there because ultimately it made more sense to take that 2-year, 3-year plea offer than it did to go to trial and risk 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, because we have things like mandatory minimums. We have situations where we took discretion, which means like a judge can't decide, you know what, I'm just going to give you this number of years. They have to sentence you. If you're found guilty in this kind of, circus court, which it can look like sometimes, you are then put into prison for potentially 25 years to life. So when you're risking even 10 years in court at a trial, you're more likely to just take a couple years and plea. But then once you do, you're stamped, right? You're stamped as a felon. You can't get a job. You can't sometimes get housing. I mean, we have made it so you are just a permanent underclass in this country. So yes, we have a ton of innocent people locked up right now. We do. And we have a ton of people who did something wrong, as we've all done. I mean, I've committed crimes. I just didn't get caught, right? We're all kind of criminals. Certain of us didn't get caught. I'm sorry, I hate to say that. Maybe that's not true for you guys, I don't know. But most rooms I'm in, we can find something we did, right? So whether we have innocent people behind bars, but we just have people behind bars. And that as a way of handling wrongdoing has clearly failed. So we need to do something different. And we need to address the fact that we have a ton of innocent people behind bars and just people generally. But yes.
I know you have a lot of questions. I'm wondering if you have any for public ed, immigrant rights, or worker rights, just to keep us spread around our different topics.
We do have an education one that was submitted also that we can ask if we don't get
So one of those three.
I'm trying. You said that you. Oh. You said that you were an immigrant. Would you mind sharing your story?
I'm gonna make a note about that. I think in general we have to be very careful about asking people about their stories of migration, because sometimes they trigger things that are really, really hard to deal with. And so because I do this work, I can talk about it, but that's just a side note on that for the future, because many of perhaps some friends of yours may have a story of migration, but when you ask about it, you will pull that pain out, and it's hard to reshelve it, to put it back in. And so for me, my father was a congressman in Peru, and in 1992, Fujimori, the president back then, shut down Congress. And so many of us had to go into hiding because we didn't know what was going to happen. If they were going to take families away, if they were going to kill them. So we went and hid somewhere with my mom and my sister, and then my dad and my brother went and hid somewhere else, really to not put the whole family at risk. And so after that, we migrated with my mom, my brother, and my sister. My dad always stayed in Peru. He is in fact there still. And we went to Virginia for a year. But because of the family separation, my dad became really ill. And so we decided as a family that we needed to go back there and just be together, regardless of what we were going through, what we were facing. And so when I started becoming a little older, I became politically involved as well. And I participated in some of the actions that my dad would put together, would organize with other members of our political party. And at some point we realized that we were being followed by intelligence. And a few months after, we decided that I needed to leave the country. And so I came to Charlotte, where my brother had moved because of work. Because the first time we migrated, he stayed here in the US. And so for work, he migrated to Charlotte. And so when I migrated the second time, I came to be with him here. And so, in a nutshell, a lot of details, of course, but yeah.
Maybe like two with like not more than 2 minute answers. And I have one here on workers' rights that somebody turned in, and I have one on education. So I'll share those from the stage now.
I have a workers' rights question for
Okay.
Hello, my name is Deontay. I got a question for Mr. Williams. What actions have to be taken to increase minimum wage?
Thank you.
So far, I began my travels with Hour last year. I stopped working retail for a while. I started working on my own, working for myself. But then I became aware of Hour and what Hour was doing from a friend of mine that's been a member for a while. I've traveled so far to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where we were with another organization, participating in certain actions that made people aware of what was going on as far as the Federal Reserve and how decisions that they made as far as the way that money would flow throughout the country would affect every single person here. So, a livable, making everyone aware of a livable wage, and making sure everybody making sure everyone's aware of that we need full hours, because a lot of people still work now. Even a lot of parents I know still don't make full hours, can't get a full 40 hours a week. That's why you see a lot of parents today that may not work in a white collar society, they're working 2 or 3 jobs, or they got 2 jobs on weekdays, 2 jobs on the weekends, and still trying to provide some type of side gig, side hustle. So the past year I've been putting so much effort into just making people aware, whether it's been traveling, going to certain actions. I travel a lot now with the work that I do, so even with that, I'm always talking to someone, hey, if I go to Walmart, how you like it here? You feeling hours. Like, if not, here's this group here. I'm always making someone aware. I'm always inviting someone into our organization, whether they join or not. It's completely up to them, because a lot of people do fear that, if I'm doing this or if I'm speaking against my work, I may lose my job. But at the same time, I'm still pushing and I'm still making people aware to this day, and I'll probably still do it now.
All right, so we've got 8 minutes, and we're going to close out the first period. And so I'm going to ask this question. I don't know if the student is here or not this morning, but it's a question for Brian Prophet. So, Mr. Prophet, if you could take the question in like a minute or so, and then 2 minutes total to also say how students can get involved in these issues. Then we'll go to everybody with that last closeout question of how you think kids can connect to this work. So the question is, why don't all schools get the same amount of money for educational purposes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think the most important part of the question is the first word, which is why. Which I think if there's anything that you can take from this panel, that's what I want y'all to leave with is the power of the question why. Because actually, like, we're up here talking about Walmart, right? Walmart is run by the Walton family, right? Walton family is super rich. Y'all know how the Walton family got super rich? Because they pay people at Walmart no money. And so if I sell something for $100 and I only have to pay the worker $5, how much do I get? Let's do quick math. $95, yeah. But did I do the work that made that thing happen? No, I just own the place, right? And so we've set up a society where people like Jeff Bezos, people like Bill Gates, people like the guy that runs Tesla, whatever, they have all the stuff. And they have all the stuff because they divide us from each other and we're too stupid to figure it out, right? So like how many people, are there more people in the Walton family or people who work in Walmart? People who work at Walmart, right? So why don't all those people at Walmart just line up and say, nah, we're not doing this anymore? Because it's scary, we might lose our job, all these other kinds of things, and also like racism, they divide people from each other. So the reason why Walmart workers don't make enough money, the reason why immigrant people have to live in the shadows, the reason why people are locked up, the reason why we don't have good housing, the reason why we have an environment full of poisons, is because there's certain people who are invested in taking all of our stuff, and we don't link up with each other to fight back against them. And so that's the same reason why some schools have stuff and some schools don't, is because we have a society where those of us, the majority of us, don't build with each other, instead we fight each other, and we let the people like Jeff Bezos steal all of our money away from us. So the reason why we have schools that have stuff and don't have stuff is because we don't have a movement to change that. And so if I have to, in 20 seconds, tell y'all what y'all need to do, we're building a union of educators, right? All the folks that y'all work with, the people who wear red every Wednesday, that's the people who we're trying to get on the same team and trying to break down these divisions between us. Y'all build a student union. Y'all ask each other questions, figure out what it is that you need to make schools better, link up with the teachers who are wearing red, and go talk to Dr. Logan about what's going to make Hillside a better place. That's what y'all can do. And then y'all can find people from other high schools, link up with them, and go down to the school board meeting and say, here are the things that we want and need. If y'all do it one by one, each individual person, you're going to lose. Your school's not going to get better, and your school's not going to have the good stuff that the other schools do. If you all link up with each other and link up with other students just like you across the district, we can win anything we need.
In 40 to 60 seconds, I would say something that I did right when I got to undergrad, so since y'all are graduating and wherever you're going next, you can do this. I mean, like, go around and register people whose voting rights have been reinstated, right? So people who have been in the system and now can vote, and I can maybe send your teacher like what is the criteria to have been convicted and have a record but now be able to vote. Like, go around and help people register, because the people most affected, we have to shift power, right? And so how do we shift power to those individuals? The only other thing, restorative justice, which I think is now trying to operate in Durham schools, like, that is a new way to address conflict, right? So, like, get involved if there's a way to get involved, like, invest in address wrongdoing and conflict within communities.
And everybody needs to clean up after yourselves when you leave.
Hey y'all, so I'm really hoping that some of you choose environmental or climate justice as your topic, and so that we can work together along the rest of the semester to really kind of get you more versed in some of this work. My organization partners with young people and young-led organizations often, and so if you want to learn more, feel free to get your email from your teacher. We're having a climate conversation coming up in Durham the week of September 23rd. I can share more information on that with your teacher.
Okay, we're going to be leaving some flyers with you guys. Your teachers, I have information for you. Online, you'll be able to take a survey, let us know how things are going in your workplace, how things are going at work, how you like everything. Give us a better idea as to what, we're fighting for you. Make it more personal for you.
Thank you. I think mainly I would love for us to talk about our own stories of migration. Even if we're not migrants, maybe we have an ancestor who was a migrant. So really dig deep into that history. I think it's important because with that information you can talk about your own family history and talk about how people have migrated. The only people who are indigenous from this area, a lot of them were massacred by the European invaders. But there are many who are still here in this land working to assert their rights. And so if we can learn our histories of migration, and then also learn the histories of the people who are being displaced right now, all those migrants that are coming here and that are going to different places around the world, not just the US, by the way, then we can talk about how it is important to talk about the root causes of migration. We can do it through technology. I would love to share with you how to do a podcast, how to do a video probably. I have volunteers that are ready to teach you how to do that type of stuff, how to work social media, how to create an online campaign. So yes, I'm looking forward to seeing you.
And I'll just say two things. One, I want you to educate yourself on the way to become an owner and the power that you have in ownership. And two, it's selfish. I can't do this work by myself. So I need you all to go to law school. I need you all to come out and fight for the people and not forget the community.
All right, y'all. Give a huge round of applause and thank you to our guests. And we'll see you back in Civics class to break down the discussion.
Bell didn't ring yet. Look all